good afternoon, everyone. We're going to switch things up a little bit, and I'm going to have somebody far more talented and exciting come up and moderate for us today. But what I would like to say is, for those of you who've stuck around for the afternoon, I know it's a little bit warm in here. This audience and this audience only is going to be eligible for one first-class ticket to Paris on Air Canada. Is this right, Joseph? That's right. Okay, so am I eligible for this? Oh, perfect. I'm staying then. I'm not going to go into any great detail because we have a very esteemed panel of folks that are going to come up, and they'll be introduced later. Interesting conversation that you've just had around cannabis and the potential opportunity for products like cannabis to replace opioid and other very, very harmful medications that we're treating the population with right now. But what I'd like to do is just move right into our panel, and it really is my my distinct pleasure and honor to invite to the stage one of the most dynamic ministers of our federal government, real dynamo, a woman I've known for a lot of years, and I think the world of, and our country is very fortunate to have such a person in Mary Nang as our Minister of Small Business and Export. And with that, I'm going to invite the Minister to take the stage and lead us through this panel. Mary.
Thank you so much for that, Allan, and it's really a joy to be here. And this is really impressive. It's a Friday late in the afternoon, and what an audience that we have. So it's wonderful to be here today. Good afternoon, bonjour à tous. Before we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the peoples of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. And thank you to our good friends at the International Economic Forum of the Americas for convening what is really an impressive group of innovators and leaders in industry at this year's Toronto Global Forum. Congratulations. I know the great work that you do in putting forums like this together. So really a hand to the Economic Forum of Americas. Bravo. I'm really looking forward to having a panel discussion, but I'll say a few words before we get into a really lively discussion, I hope. It is through events like the one here today, where leaders from both the public and the private sectors, trailblazers in various industries, as well as advocates, innovators, entrepreneurs, who all come together to have the kind of productive discussions that then lead to what is fulsome change. So I'm very, very thrilled to be a part of this year's closing plenary session with some of the very brightest minds in the field of healthcare and bioscience to discuss implementing medical innovation in Canada. But this is not something new to a country like Canada. From creating the Canada Arm to pioneering open heart surgery, Canada has always been at the forefront of discovery. And when we formed government in 2015, we did so with a mandate to invest in Canadian ideas after, frankly, a decade of stagnation, to invest and harness and unleash the entrepreneurial spirit that is waiting beneath a surface at the time that was somewhat fragile on the economy. Our government began work by prioritizing innovation and job creation, and today 1 million new jobs are created here in Canada, and Canada truly is leading on the world stage as a nation of innovators. We've worked hard to ensure that Canada provides a competitive edge for its businesses, those that are operating here, and those that are operating here where we want them to grow and grow into the global marketplace. And our plan is working. Forbes recently named Canada as one of the best places in the world to do business. Canadian companies like Hopper, Lightspeed, Broadband TV, Shopify, these are becoming household names, and these are Canadian juggernauts on the international stage, growing and growing exponentially. Ottawa was named in 2018 as the fastest high-tech growth hub for jobs. But as our Prime Minister always says, better is always possible, and our work on behalf of Canadians is a continuum. From the beginning, we have taken an innovative approach towards industry and government, and that is industry and government collaborating together to keep pushing the boundaries, to identify new ways of collaborating, to find enablers to help Canadian firms who are scaling up and who need to scale up. I had the good fortune of appointing Sheldon Levy, who was my special advisor for scaling up companies, and over the last several months, Sheldon has given us some really good advice on a number of opportunities where we could accelerate the progress of Canada's Innovation and Skills Plan. Last month, I announced the first steps of one such opportunity. It's an initiative that builds directly on the recommendations and the work of the Economic Strategy Table, where the Economic Strategy Table for Health and Biosciences, and that goal of doubling the size of the industry by 2025. So whether it is the discovery of insulin to the invention of the pacemaker, Canada has long had a strong record of health innovation. We know that healthcare is one of the highest priorities for Canadians, and you certainly see government spending reflecting this. In fact, healthcare spending in Canada reached $253 billion in 2018, and the international market for medical technologies alone is estimated to be worth $500 billion annually. It's why I was so excited to launch that initiative called the Can Health Network. The Can Health Network is an integrated market. It enables promising Canadian companies to work directly with healthcare organizations to understand their needs, commercialize health technologies, and to meet those needs and scale up companies. We've all heard, I know many in this room certainly has, the familiar story of a great idea or a product that is developed here in Canada, but that looks first to either the US or the international marketplace overseas to scale up their product sales or to even get into the market. Or the technology that they've developed is outright purchased by a global multinational, or the company relocates because the gravitational pull is just too large, particularly next to the largest market, where that is where their growth seems to take place first. And therefore, Canada's leadership and opportunity to lead is indeed lost. So through the Can Health Network, through this integrated market, Canadian SMEs and leading startups will be able to work with an integrated market of early adopter institutions to collaboratively research, to develop, to refine Canadian medical technologies, making them market ready for sale. This integrated market is going to give companies a single window to which they can access billions of dollars of purchasing opportunity. When the first sale is made within the integrated market, these technologies or service can easily be sold to any other partner in the integrated health network, the Can Health Network, enabling a company to scale up by leveraging the purchasing power of Canadian healthcare procurement. Our initial investments, the Canadian government's initial investment, is in Western Canada, from Manitoba to British Columbia, and here in Ontario. These are the first points of the national integrated market. Right here in the Toronto region, the initial network partners is led by Trillium Health Partners, and they include some really extraordinary institutions. The Hospital for Sick Kids, Prism Eye Institute, SE Health, the Sinai Health System, Sunnybrook Health Sciences Centre, the University Health Network, Unity Health Toronto. There are many others in Ontario as well as in Western Canada. And I want to really give a really special thank you to the executive teams of these initial partner institutions, because you're not only showing leadership by committing to early adoption and scaling up Canadian companies, but you are taking risks. You're taking risks just like some of these entrepreneurs and these businesses who you are committing to work with do every day. By harnessing this economic opportunity with leading edge SMEs and scaling up, we're going to build Canadian leadership in health and biosciences, in the technology, and creating global companies that's going to anchor thousands of jobs to be created right here in Canada. I'll give you an example. Companies like the A-Linker, founded by Barbara A-Link. When her mother could no longer use a walker, Barbara redesigned the A-Linker walking bike. The device looks like a small bike without pedals, making it easy to move around. She can go into the Can Health Network, and that integrated market will help Barbara partner with any of the organizations in the Can Health Network, giving her access to support from the broader network, helping her not only continue to develop, but to be the early adopter, to be the first customer, to scale up that business, and to grow. And not only grow here in Canada, but building that customer base here in Canada, she can grow and grow into the international marketplace. So as a nation of innovators, we need to be bold. We need to continue to drive our innovation economy forward. We need to apply that same level of ingenuity when we started in 2015 and keep doing it. And where there's no path, we must forge one and leverage our successes into even greater successes. It's because this is how we are going to protect and spur the strong economy that we have to even greater heights and to create those opportunities grounded here in Canada. We have just begun. This is an incredible start, and I'm looking forward to where this is going to take us. I'm looking forward to a conversation that we're going to have. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me. Merci beaucoup. And at this time, I'm going to introduce and call up to the stage Zaina. Apologies, Zaina. Zaina, come on up. Zaina's going to talk about the Can Health Network. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm Zaina Kayat. I lead the Futures or Innovation team for one of Canada's largest home care agencies, St. Elizabeth Healthcare, or SE Health. So she just described how we're going to take Canadian-born inventions and get them adopted and get them to patients. And we're one of those health delivery organizations in this Can Health Network that's going to do that at scale. And so on behalf of the many of us in this Can Health Network, from British Columbia all the way through to Ontario, we're really, really pleased that our government stepped up and did this to create this opportunity. So just so you understand what we're doing, because I think I see quite a few tech companies in the crowd, we're calling ourselves Edges because we love you too, and Bono has an edge, so we could have one too. The idea though would be that as a large health delivery organization, and we've got hospitals and private clinics, that if we help get young Canadian ventures and technology to patients at scale, we're going to give them an edge. And it's a lot easier to go scale internationally as the whole world builds into healthcare infrastructure if your own backyard is buying your stuff. And this incredible investment has allowed that to happen across Canada. We don't do very many things across Canada, and the fact that we were able to somehow marshal all these organizations and edges who will all be managed regionally, I think is a feat in and of itself. So I'm very excited and proud on behalf of the other edges and on behalf of SE Health to be on this journey with you. We are always looking for ways to help people live their best lives at home, and we know technology has a big part in that. So this is a huge opportunity, and without this announcement and this support, it wouldn't be possible. So thank you for your leadership, and have a terrific panel today, everybody.
I'd like to just quickly introduce a very important guest that's joined us to listen in on your panel, and that is the Minister of Health for the province of Ontario. For those of you who are from outside of the country, Ontario represents about 40% of the country and a very, very large health system. In fact, it would be the single largest HMO in North America if we were to measure it in those terms. We're very fortunate to be served by the Honourable Christine Elliott. She is an amazing Minister of Health. From time to time, I have opportunity to interact with this minister as the head of the Ontario Medical Association. And as Canadians and as Ontarians, we're very lucky to have the Minister join us today and to be leading the transformation of health in the province. So Minister might like to just make a few remarks and welcome you all here. Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Allan, for your kind comments, and good afternoon, everyone. I am not a scheduled guest, but I saw this on the session, and I just had to be here to welcome you. And I know this is the end of your session, but to tell you how important health innovation is in the work that all of you are doing. And for those of you who are visiting us from outside of Ontario, please forgive my bias in favor of Ontario with some of the remarks that I'm going to make. But essentially, we are going through a massive time of change in healthcare in Ontario. We are trying to bring Ontario's healthcare system into the 21st century. That means, in some part, getting rid of faxes in healthcare and bringing us up to date. We're looking at all the medical practices, how we practice healthcare, the things that we do. But of course, technology is really, really important. Innovation is extremely important for us to get to the place that we need to be in order to deliver excellent quality patient care to people. And for those of you who don't know me, for several years I was Ontario's first patient ombudsman. So I heard every day on the issues that patients were concerned about, how they wanted more integrated, connected care, and of course, technology and innovation are going to be key for that connection to be able to happen. But I also want to say that we have some wonderful, great projects, I guess I would call them, that are going on in Ontario right now. Really world-class innovations that I think that we can be very, very proud of. And we have an opportunity here in Ontario to make sure that Ontario isn't just a user of tax dollars, but is a job creator, is adding to the provincial revenues. And I know that we have some projects that are going on here in Ontario that are going to be make Ontario proud and help the rest of the world. So I just want to say thanks to all of you. It's wonderful to see so many people here at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, but thank you very much, and I hope your discussion goes very well. Thank you very much for allowing me to join you.
Well, thank you so very much for that, Minister, and it's really wonderful to be here with you. And I'm looking forward to this really great conversation. And for a change, it doesn't happen often, but for a change, I get to be the one asking the questions and not being on the hot seat to answer them. So isn't that great? It's going to be all of you. So you just heard me talk about the creation of an integrated market, the Can Health Network, which really is where its objective is to be an early adopter and to adopt and grow and scale Canadian companies here in Canada, so that we can grow these great Canadian companies here. So I've got a couple of, so maybe this is how I'll start, and maybe to you, Chris, you're sitting right next to me, so lucky you. But Chris, this initiative that I just talked about, Canada is an innovation-based economy. We've got this new integrated market for these, to help these Canadian companies scale. How do you see digital innovation influencing the health ecosystem?
Well, first, I'd say I think it makes an awful lot of sense for Canada to be focused on innovation. I led a large pharmaceutical company for many years, Sanofi in Paris. And one of the things that I would see as I went around the world are there's so many countries focus on really large corporations, and it's really small corporations that both create jobs and actually do innovation. So, I congratulate you first for thinking about small businesses, because that's really where things are happening first and foremost. Today I run a healthcare investment fund. I see all kinds of things that are going on in digital innovation. I actually started that at Sanofi, so I think there's a number of ways that digital can really benefit. And I would also say healthcare is probably one of the last frontiers of digital. I mean, this is the area where it has penetrated the least, and there are a lot of good reasons for that. And there are also, we can talk about some of the barriers to it. But Obviously one is finding new drugs. There's a massive big data initiative going on to try to understand, the correlation between genetics and what we see in actual patient experience through electronic medical records, the environment they're living in, and I know Mickey will be talking more about that in a little bit. We can better tailor treatments. We can actually use data to get the right treatment, particularly in oncology for you. We can diagnose you better. Artificial intelligence has been shown to read scans, for instance, 30% more accurately than humans can do. We can actually manage costs. Boston Children's Hospital, for instance, looked at non-urgent medical transportation. Uber cannot actually take on those things directly because of patient privacy concerns. So a startup company came in and became the manager, if you like, of non-urgent medical transportation, which was costing millions. And they actually then interface with Uber and have saved the system an awful lot of money. Obviously, you can get into population health management and actually get to better outcomes at the same or lower cost. Access, one of our companies, is actually building a virtual care network for a major U.S. corporation. And when you think about Canada, and my parents live in a small town in Ontario here, and it's not always easy to get in to see a physician. Actually, virtual care would be a great way of getting primary care to a lot of remote parts of the world, not just in Canada. And because about 70% of primary care can be actually diagnosed without actually seeing the patient. And then finally, and probably most importantly, this can be a much better patient experience. I got really interested in this when I was at Sanofi, and we were looking at diabetes patients. Patients who go on insulin probably are already advanced. They've gone through every other treatment. But 50% of them were dropping off insulin. And there are 100 amputations every day in the United States, and 60 people go blind every day due to complications of diabetes. And part of the problem is that we have episodic interfacing between the medical system and patients. And through data, we can actually track what's going on. We can actually help patients. There's wearables today. There's online services. Mental health is a serious issue in so many cities. Not enough mental health experts. And we can actually connect with these patients digitally and provide them with a lot more support, particularly on chronic disease. So I think it's a huge opportunity.
That's really great. Some of you are wondering, what is it that, Canada's Minister for Small Business and Expert Promotion is sitting here with, with a number of experts in the healthcare space and in this field. But what you just talked about right now, Chris, was a number of those examples are those very Canadian small and medium-sized companies who are operating and who are developing and who are creating. And so maybe I'll go to Mickey on the very same question. You are a serial entrepreneur. You are in this space of understanding, or sort of certainly seeing, probably the same way that I see a number of Canadian technologies or startups or entrepreneurs in this space. So so what is the opportunity there for for those companies?
So I think what's happened in the last decade in terms of the type of data that is accessible to any entrepreneur that can actually change healthcare.
Can people hear you? You might just need to take the mic closer.
Okay. That can actually change healthcare forever. So when you're looking at a Canadian system, this is a dispersed country. You have a lot of very remote communities. You do have a system where you've got some central hospitals that pull for 500 or 600 kilometers. So there is a real opportunity to go and build solutions that are going to innovate into exactly that problem. And that innovation is going to come from new and novel data that's getting generated through wearable devices or through your cell phones or through apps that you're developing. And when you consider the fact that when we look at something like remote patient monitoring, which 10 years ago was very complex and you had to put medical machinery into people's homes, all of that has gone away, and we're wearing $100 wearables that have the same capacity as those things that used to cost thousands of dollars in home. So if you're thinking about innovating into that space is the huge opportunity. It's new data, it's generating at massive amounts per day, and it's solving real problems in medicine, whether we talk about remote monitoring or we talk about diagnostics.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually also building communities, right? I mean, in being able to enable some of these entrepreneurs or innovators or companies that are operating. They don't only operate in the big city centers, they in fact are operating all across communities, all across this country. So the opportunity, you're right, with technology really gives us the opportunity to do that. Peter, you are the CIO of a hospital that, that is a digital hospital. So talk to us about, your experience and, and how it is that you see how your institution, can be an early adopter here.
Working, good. Thank you. Yes, so first of all, let me just say a little bit about Humber River Hospital in case you don't know who we are. If you drive along the 401 and you look to the north at Keele Street, there's a big building there, that's Humber River Hospital. And we opened our doors in 2015, and we were branded North America's first fully digital hospital. And by the way, the funny story about that was we sat there and went, well, we don't know if we really are, but why don't we just claim it and see if anybody tells us we're wrong? Nobody did, so there we are. The reality is that we actually did a very big implementation of technology. It's interesting to talk about this because it's really a business transformation that happened to use digital. And we see that across many, many industries who are engaging in business transformation, and technology is a foundation for that. So what happened at Humber, having done this transformation? Many things. First of all, incredible improvement in efficiency and quality of care. And when I say tremendous, we're talking about a 20% net benefit change to our organization. In real terms, what is that? We see more patients with the same number of staff, and we put dollars in the bank as a consequence. We provide better quality care. We spend more time with patients. We increase patient satisfaction. We have increased staff satisfaction. It is absolutely transformative what transpired there. We didn't really appreciate how much of that would happen, but once we got into it and we completed it, those were the outcomes. So digital in the healthcare space has just huge impact, and the more we do it, the better off everybody's going to be, absolutely.
Thank you for that. James, I'm going to come to you next. As a leader, you're here on behalf of Life Labs, right, as a board member? Yep. And, as a leader in, in this sector, how do you see innovation? How do you see medical innovation affecting, affecting research and treatments and care?
Sure. So, first and foremost, I am a member of the. Can everybody hear me? Okay. I am a member of the board of Life Labs. I'm actually here on behalf of Bruce Power, but I'm happy to tell you all the great things at Life Labs too. If you want, give me half an hour on that. A lot of people sort of say, hey, why is a representative of a nuclear power company on a panel on health innovation? It's probably why you're looking at, where in this bio does this make sense?
I think people are asking me that too.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe I can just give you a bit of color. And since you said this is question period or answer period, so I can say whatever I want, right? Bruce Power, our core business isn't healthcare. Our core business is generating electricity. We are home to the largest operating nuclear facility in the world. We provide about 35% of Ontario's power. So if you're here in Toronto and you're happy with the clean air we have here in Ontario because we closed all of our coal plants, it's actually because of our nuclear fleet in Ontario. So I think it's great that Minister Elliott is here because it's the provincial government that sets our energy policy. But why does that matter to health? One of the big areas, Minister, that we focused on with health innovation is using that infrastructure we've put in place to generate electricity as a new supply, a reliable supply of medical isotopes. And so right now our facility is providing 40% of the world's cobalt 60, which is used in any operating room, anywhere you go for sterilization of medical equipment. But we're also producing a special kind of cobalt 60 that's used in brain tumors and breast cancer treatment. And so, where do I fit in the panel? I haven't exactly figured that out yet. But really, if you think about all of the things that are going on in healthcare innovation, especially when it comes to cancer diagnosis and treatment, it is all based on an assumption that there is a reliable supply of global isotopes. That historically has been a role that Canada has played, and Canada has played that role incredibly well. I worry that we are not on a solid foundation of that isotope supply. So what our business is focused on is saying, look, we have 8 reactors on our site. We have a multi-billion-dollar investment program to ensure they're generating electricity. Now we are making investments in those reactors to provide redundant global supply of isotopes. And so it's incredibly strategic. I always like to say, what is the most important thing when it comes to generating electricity, aside from reliability and cost? It's when you turn the switch on, that light works. How do we make sure that works at the Bruce Power site? We have 8 reactors, so if we're doing maintenance on one or activities on another, we have other reactors to back that up. From a healthcare perspective, that's also important for all these healthcare providers. They don't want a reactor or another way of making medical isotopes have an interruption and impact patients. Happy to talk about all the great works Life Labs is doing some other time, but that's really why I'm here. And but as an Ontarian and a Canadian, I look at that role we have played historically in supplying isotopes as something we really have punched above our weight as a country. But I worry it's an area of healthcare internationally that we're seeing a lot of advancements in this area with a risk of isotope supply, and that's really the contribution, Minister, we're hoping to make.
Great, thank you so much. So to the entrepreneur, to Sanjeev, actually I'm going to give this, and to Mickey too, what do you think the biggest challenges are when it comes to innovation in health, and what is it that government or our federal government or any government for that matter can do to better support Canadian companies, entrepreneurs or healthcare professionals through this process of innovating? Sure, thank you.
So just a little bit about our company. First of all, we're probably the smallest company here on this panel. We're a startup that basically does we're both American and Canadian, and we provide digital e-health solutions to countries around the world. One of which we've just started and signed with is Rwanda in Africa. In response to your second part of your question is, I think the Canada Health application you just started was actually a phenomenal way to help support Canadian companies to get across Canada and implement healthcare innovations. One of the bigger challenges, I think, is, and the challenge is not just Canadian, I think it's almost in every country. Healthcare, there's a dichotomy in healthcare. A lot of urban cities have very good healthcare coverage and a lot of good technology, whereas most of the rural parts of most countries, including Africa and including Canada, for example, don't have access to care as well. So what we did is we created online digital applications that interconnect rural areas, and we start at the rural base and collect all the patient digital treatments and all their information and bring it right up to the upper level. And in Rwanda, for example, that has allowed us to save them $9 million a year in their healthcare costs, which is significant for them. At the same time, we now bring healthcare services to over 12 million people by having doctors and nurses get to areas where they could not get to before. And these are things that can happen in Canada as well. These are things that are needed everywhere.
Right. Maybe I'll actually ask this question kind of across the panel, but Mickey, if you could start. I mean, what are the barriers? I mean, to and the challenges to coming, to innovating in the healthcare space.
I have a very funny story about that, because one of the panelists on this panel is actually the reason that we exist. Mm-hmm. And I think when you're starting companies, there's always, especially in healthcare, people are very mission driven. You're doing it for a reason. Oftentimes it's a person in your family who's suffering. So you start these companies with enormous enthusiasm, and then you hit this wall called healthcare. And there's one thing that I've learned in healthcare, it's the first answer to every question is no. And so the Can Health Network is exactly the right idea. It's the idea of putting a safe place where there are risk takers who are actually willing to step out. And I'll give the exact example. So when we started the company, we were doing new measures of health. We were going to help diagnose people. We had an obsession about autoimmune disease. And I can tell you, nobody believed us. And finally, I was sitting in Sanofi's offices, and there was one man who was talking about, let's get patient-centered. Let's start with the patient. Let's think about how digital is going to transform the world. And they took a risk, and that was Chris, thank you. But that was Sanofi. But it takes that network of people who are willing to step outside to try. They're not all going to work. But I mean, I think now we're at a stage where we've done our very first marker discovering or diagnosing cognitive impairment. So you're starting to see cognitive decline in digital data. We've started diagnostics for understanding which diseases you have. And I think another thing that Canada has to do, and this is another small obsession, is when you look at disease maps, you look at something like multiple sclerosis, we shouldn't have the highest per capita MS patient population in the world. Why? Why do we have it? Let's go find the data. We know that there is a virus in water. What has that virus got to do with MS? And start putting these data sets together and really going into this world of exploration, discovery, and taking some risk at a country level to go and solve some of these problems, because it isn't in industry's best interest to solve why MS is increasing in northern populations. It is their interest that they do increase. So it's going to take a whole different way of thinking to change that and go solve the why prior to selling the drugs.
Yeah, we say this all the time. I mean, it really takes everyone, and I think that's what the Can Health Network envisages to be. Those who will early adopt and those who have solutions. I would also say that, having met literally thousands of companies across the country, the very valuable information, which is that you may be developing something, but guess what? None of us want it or need it. It's not what we want. So that no is also equally valuable, particularly for a young company that is starting and pursuing and looking for their customer or their first customer. So I think that's also, really, really quite important. So I'll just keep going along the way. What gets in the way of health innovation, and what can we do? What gets in the way of innovating in health, and what can we do about it? What can governments do about it? What can we do about it?
How many healthcare people are here? Oh, just 3, so I can insult you then, sorry.
How many businesses are here?
Yes, health. So my experience is that healthcare is inherently not geared to change. And if I just cite somewhat of an obvious statement, you wouldn't want a nurse to be entrepreneurial and try different things on you because she thinks or he thinks it's a good idea. You might just die. So people are trained to not change. And so here we're talking about innovation, which is inherently change. And this is the paradox I see in healthcare. And your comment of no is exactly exemplifying that point. So it's not to say that we should have healthcare suddenly become all entrepreneurial all over the place. No, but what it does require is leadership that is willing to take not so much a risk, but to really go forth and say, yes, we need to not sit on our on the way that things are done today, but we do need to explore doing things differently. And I think what really helps with that is when others have demonstrated that if you go and do that, it does lead to a positive outcome. Not necessarily a clinical outcome, it could be a business outcome, it could be an operational benefit, but that is, I see, something that's tremendously lacking, certainly in the environment I'm in, where everybody is pretty status quo and doesn't want to take that leap forward. So somehow to change that would be very valuable.
You heard me give a shout out to those great executives and the leaders who actually are the first ones into the Can Health Network. That's a shout out to all of them, because that's exactly what they're doing a little differently. Chris, what do you think?
Well, what's interesting is actually if you look at the digital health space from an investment point of view, I mean, there's literally hundreds of companies out there. People have got an app for this and a database for that. And it's been a graveyard of really lousy investments up to now. Largely, I mean, one reason is clearly adoption. One of the problems that exists in the United States, obviously, is we have a much more fragmented healthcare system. So if you already have a resistance on the part of your customer, I mean, imagine the marketing effort that you have to employ to get this new technology adopted. And so, as a company, you go through a first valley of death while you're funding your technology, but then there's an even bigger second valley of death as you try to get this adopted. And what you are proposing here is that you can probably simplify that first an awful lot through your network and integrated market, because you have a single payer system and you can actually do that. You don't have the fragmentation. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody also works nicely with each other. And so I think creating the network is probably an important thing to do. I think, the medical profession has as its motto, first do no harm. I mean, and so they are conservative. Studies have demonstrated that this is the profession that adopts best practice, the slowest of any profession. So the more that actually you could also start to build an evidence base behind some of these technologies, because physicians really do want to put their patient interest first. So to the extent that some of these companies could be helped in saying, what kind of evidence base do we have? You're going to need the regulators to play along with this. One of the things that I was a part of in the US was actually getting more funding to the FDA, because as all of these technologies changes, not just digital, but I mean, we're into third generation medicines with gene therapy and cell therapy, and yet if you have the same people in your regulatory agencies, they don't know what to do with this. So one needs to think about the regulators and their capabilities, because they can actually provide some of the regulatory good seal of housekeeping, if you like, so that could also help on adoption. So to the extent that Health Canada can really be thinking about that would also be good. And then the final thing is, and I don't know, having not lived in Canada for a number of years, but one of the things that does exist in the United States are highly specialized VCs. Mm-hmm. And these VCs do not just put money in place. These are VCs that actually incubate the companies and provide an awful lot of the coaching and mentoring that a lot of smaller companies actually need. So to the extent that there are specialized VCs that really are only in healthcare and sometimes only in digital. And so helping with that capital formation would be a good thing.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I mean, I think about the work that we have been doing, and this is why the Minister of Small Business and Export Promotion. It's about being able to provide the right supports and services to be able to help our Canadian companies along that journey to growth. It is working, across government, sort of on a whole of government approach, so that we are being sensitive to the competitive environment that companies operate in, which includes the regulatory environment. Regulations are really important because it's also what gives Canada its enormous brand. We have such an enormous brand because we are considered to be of integrity. We are safe. We are high quality. We are all those things, and that comes because we've got great regulations. But we also have regulations that actually genuinely need to be modernized, that need to be innovated as well. So in our last federal budget, we put something together called it's not quite called a sandbox, but that's the concept. It's a sandbox idea for regulations, so that we are working in tandem. So that we are considering those impacts, but also just try to, be as responsive as we can, because as our industries are changing and innovating, it needs all of those pieces. Regulations is a part of it. I'm really proud. I mean, to talk about in the last 4 years, a little under 4 years, about $450 million of venture capital funding that we have put out at the federal government. That's essentially leveraged, probably a little over $1.5 billion, right? I mean, and that's exactly right. It's that kind of smart capital that isn't just about funding. It is funding, and to a specialized fund. I mean, not in the health and bioscience, I suppose, yet. I mean, the VCs will cover all of that. But for example, 50 million of it was dedicated clean tech, but just on that idea, right? Because it is being able to have funding that also comes with that expertise and that commitment to not only provide the capital and to leverage capital, other capital, but also to make sure that that capital is also working, because there is now a skin in the game to ensure the success, the very, very success of of those companies. But you also touched on a point, Chris, about the importance of data and how to utilize data and the analytics that are coming, that are emerging in every single sector. So health, no different. And maybe I'll just kind of go back then through the panel about how is it that we should be looking at this, and when you talk about it, it's a very big topic. But how do you then deal with it on a bite-sized chunk so that there's some pragmatism that might be, that might come to bear?
Good. I've got 17 minutes. That's great. Sorry, guys.
But you got to share, Peter. You can't take the whole 17. You got to share with the others.
So,
but it's perfect. We're starting with you on this one.
Not more than 17.
Yeah, no. I'll keep it to my little bit. So this is a wonderful topic, because this is something that we're absolutely doing at the hospital, and it's wonderful to see where we're leveraging data. So having done the digital transformation, so now we have lots of data. So what do you do with it? And we're leveraging data and AI today to drive efficiency and quality improvement that's very, very significant. So this is not AI. When you hear about people, you mentioned it at the beginning, which is that AI can start detecting diseases in medical imaging and all this sort of stuff. I look at these things, and by the way, I've done some of that work, and it takes a lot to get that into the mainstream and actually being used on a day-to-day basis. There's another form of AI which we are using, which has an immediate impact, and this is what we call our command center. We were the second in the world to put one of these in, and what this does is leverage all of our data to give us a picture using analytics of what's going on in our hospital right at that time. And the value of this is that it allows us to step in and organize patient flow and traffic of patients through the hospital so that we are far more efficient and we create additional capacity. And capacity is a very, very key thing. The ministry, as the minister, she's here, but they've done a lot of work. We're doing a bit of a significant transformation in Ontario, and we see that thousands of acute beds are required if we don't do something differently. And use of data gives you incredible insight, and if applied correctly, it can be used today to drive significant change. I have many more pieces, but I'll let others do this. I cannot say enough that having that data at your fingertips and having AI engines in fairly simple form can do incredible amounts for you. So absolutely, we need more and more of it.
So data is pretty much all that we work on, and I think if we think of healthcare transformation, we have to think about the fact that the sort of real-world evidence data that everybody's been talking about is the sparse data sets when a patient hits the healthcare system. When you take it outside of that and we start looking at all of the digitally generated data, you now have a continuous passive data set that's getting generated by individuals. And being able to just take that data and use it in such a way that you can actually do remote patient monitoring, you can do remote diagnostics, is very realistic. And it's happening pretty much consistently now across a lot of the innovative systems that are sort of starting to go through regulatory approvals in the US. So it's at that stage. It took us 7 or 8 years to get there, but we're getting there. And the key thing when you're thinking about data is you can't look at somebody's Fitbit feed or look at all of that data and make sense of it. That's pointless. You need to have an interpretation layer, and that's what AI is going to bring. And I think Canada's extraordinarily lucky because you've got U of T and you've got one of the best AI groups, like in the world working right here. And we've done some collaborative research with them. So you don't even have to look outside of Canada for thought leadership in the space. That data's there. It can be translated into bits that are useful. And you can basically make this notion of being able to remote monitor a patient continuously in the home completely possible.
James?
Well, maybe I'll take a bit of a different tact on this. So 2 words come to mind as I'm, and it's great conversation and great questions. The first is urgency, and the second is behavior. So from the involvement that our organization has had in healthcare, whether it's through the isotopes, physician recruitment, a range of items we've been involved in, there's not a sense of urgency in terms of action. And it's, in a nuclear operating company, the question after every statement is who, by what, by when. And I think the challenge in any large organization, we face this as well, is, there's a million things you can do out there, but sometimes we debate about steps 47 to 82, and we haven't done steps 1 to 9. So I think an urgency in terms of looking at the regulatory regime and saying there's a patient who has a critical need at the end of this process, and is the risk-informed decision on that regulatory process focusing on the urgency of that patient is faced with. And I'm sure folks from a pharmaceutical company would have a lot of experience with that. But the second area is behavior. We are in a highly regulated, like healthcare, industry in nuclear. And one of the easiest things to say is, well, we have to get everything perfect because we're running a reactor, so we can't innovate quickly. Things take a long time in nuclear. It's about taking a risk-informed decision about not everything is in that camp. Don't use that as an excuse and to convince yourself that our speed is okay. And we would consider that in our industry a behavioral issue. I haven't been in one healthcare meeting where somebody says, well, you know how slow healthcare moves. That is a leadership behavior issue. People have accepted that as a reality that things take longer. And that is actually not an acceptable leadership behavior. So you can't expect, it's not about what does the system need to do to fix these things. It's actually a leadership behavior from everybody in the system to say, what actually can we do? And when I do hear this, a conversation a lot in healthcare, we see it with isotopes about, well, the system needs to do this and so needs to do that. It actually starts with your leadership behavior as an individual. And we have a lot of people in this room. It's actually, what am I going to do different? And in nuclear space, we call that kind of personal accountability. But I do think there is an acceptance of the pace and acceptance of things that I actually think that needs to go out, because the urgency is around the patient and the patient actually needing a better outcome. And all these things people are talking about lead to a better patient outcome. But there's actually an urgency on the sustainability of all of our healthcare systems, whether you're in a public system, other types of systems around the world. There is a crisis that needs to get fixed. And I don't believe the solutions are being advanced at that level of urgency.
Everyone heard me give a shout out to the leadership who actually are the early adopters in Can Health. It's that urgency.
Yep.
It's that outlook. It's that enthusiasm. It's that leadership. It is that drive to be able to work together, to collaborate together, not only here in Ontario, of course, but in many other jurisdictions, taking on that risk, taking on that leadership, working with those who might be able to provide the solutions, and truly innovating. So I think that while that may be the case in some, I certainly see a hopefulness by so many who have taken part in that very leadership to essentially address what I hope is going to be, some real solutions. And, for me in my particular file, also real economic growth that's going to come from it. Sanjeev, what about data and analysis? So same question.
Sure. Yeah, so I think I'm the only physician on this panel, so I can give a little different perspective. As a physician back in med school, medicine is all about data. What they teach us, or what we learn from the very beginning, is you take a good history, which is basically getting data, then physical examination, which is more data, and then you do laboratory tests and diagnostic imaging, all of which is more data. And then you really, in your mind, you have an algorithm, and you walk down that algorithm and you come up with a differential diagnosis. And that is entire data very basic process, an entire process that could be algorithmized and computerized, okay? And then from the differential, you then figure out what your true top 3 things are, and that's how you start treating patients. And so when you talk about data and AI, I mean, that is something that can be done by a computer. And that is something that a computer can assist a physician to do. Because I can tell you right now, I cannot ever remember 100 differential diagnosis list. If you showed me a rash, I'm a plastic surgeon, you showed me a rash today, I may think of 5 or 10 differential diagnoses on those rash, but a computer going down that algorithm will remember maybe 1,000 different options. And so it can assist a physician, it can assist a healthcare worker, and really help kind of streamline the diagnostic process and the treatment process. And so we use AI for that. We also use AI and data for predictive analytics. So again, if you look at a condition where you can say, okay, if we have a lot of large amounts of high quality data that can show us that in a population with a person with this sort of characteristics it has a 95% chance of having a heart attack in 3 months, we can intervene ahead of time and we can reach out to that patient and we can prevent the heart attack, which is not only a cost savings, because to treat a heart attack may be $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 in the United States, $1 million in ICU, and operative care with bypasses and so on. We can prevent that with early intervention, which is a huge cost saving for a country that pays for all of its health care, but also is a huge quality of life improvement, because it's much better to prevent these diseases than to treat them afterwards. So there's another example where AI and big data makes a big difference in healthcare, and it's positive for the patient, it's positive for the payer, the country, and it's positive for the providers, because it makes our ability to treat patients much easier. So in our application software, we use AI and big data in that level as well. So these are examples clinically where it makes a huge difference in patient care.
Okay, so we have just a few minutes left. So a final word from everyone. We are talking about medical innovation, we're talking about health innovation. So one last piece of advice. And it means a minute for each of you because there's 5 minutes left.
Well, I'll just pick up on the data question, because I think one of the things that wasn't mentioned is whose data is it? And right now, there are a lot of institutions who are gathering data and they're not sharing it, because you need a lot of data to do this. There's no one little bit of data that can tell you everything. You need massive amounts of data. And I sit on the board of fellows at the School of Medicine at Stanford University, for example, and we have a lot of people from Silicon Valley and saying, hey, we're in the middle of the valley, we should be the most transparent organization around. And then I turn to the CEO of the Stanford Medical System and Hospital and say, David, what do you think about that? And there's no way he is going to share this data, because this is how he keeps patients sticky to his system. There are others who are keeping this data because they think they can sell it to others. You got 23andMe out there that's busy collecting all your data and trying to develop new drugs from this. So I actually think there is a bigger issue on data. Theoretically, this belongs to the patient, but it's not always easy for patients to get it, and we're not always sure who's using it. And because of these financial interests, we're not necessarily getting the sharing of data that would really be helpful in solving some real medical problems.
Peter?
I think there's a great opportunity in it to really make a big difference in healthcare right now. The things that we're kind of talking about here are changes in medicine, changes in practices maybe, and so on. Those are all fantastic and they have to happen. But I think there's an opportunity for the quality of medicine to change dramatically right now on a day-to-day basis. Leveraging data, leveraging technology, and not having to invent a whole load of stuff. It can be done with what's already in existence. It's the comments we've been making about leadership. It's about just following process and driving it through and being diligent to doing it, and the results are coming forth. And those results are very meaningful to the quality of care to patients. So I'm very excited about that, and I think we're seeing it certainly in our institution, but there are others around the world that are beginning to demonstrate this, and that's extremely exciting for the short term.
Mickey?
Yeah, I agree. I think the one thing that we have to recognize that the data does give us is it gives us, I should say it takes away the excuse not to be patient-centric. We now have enough data that we can actually understand a person. And so when we're thinking about innovating in healthcare and we're thinking about patient centricity and patient-centered clinical trial design and all of those words, there's still a lot of words in the system, and they don't have to be. They can actually be actions because the data that is now available makes that possible. So I think that's probably the most important thing to innovate through, is the fact that we do actually have to take the patient into consideration, and all research should start from the patient, which also brings a really weird thing for an entrepreneur to say. We actually need regulators to step into the data, because the problem that will happen with this type of data, when you're looking at some of the stewards of the data, they're not playing a fair game to the patient. They're not looking after patient interest. And so when you're taking somebody's genetic data and you're doing things with it without clear intent, on clear telling people what you're doing, it's going to create problems down the road. So I think the strange thing to say is a lot of the data that is now novel data being generated in the digital realm or in new direct-to-patient type services, those things need to be regulated, because that data belongs to the individual patient, and it doesn't belong to some company aggregating on the back end and making a profit without sharing.
James?
So I would really say two things. So, back to that sense of urgency, we need to move more quickly with a greater sense of intensity and urgency, and recognize that, we have, I agree with the previous point, we have a lot of the tools available at our disposal right now to advance these things, and they need to be moved forward with far greater urgency with all players involved. Specific to sort of our area of interest and our area of business, we believe that the diagnosis and treatment of cancer in particular around the world is going to continue to improve outcomes for patients by leaps and bounds, and is very promising for all of us who in one way or another will be touched by cancer sometime in our life. And that in order to enable that, we need to ensure that, with my Canadian hat on, that Canada is a leader in supplying those medical isotopes. The world has always turned to Canada for that, and the world is looking to Canada now to provide that leadership, and we have a very historic opportunity right here in Ontario to deliver on that promise.
Great. Sanjeev?
Sure. One of the things I don't think we did touch upon is blockchain technology as well. So we're utilizing a lot of blockchain technology within our healthcare applications in order to track every process within the healthcare treatment flow. It also allows us to track every bit of data and where it's coming from. And I think Canada has a lot of very powerful blockchain companies that we're partnered with that we're using. In addition, blockchain allows us to utilize another unique creative concept, which is to use a cryptocurrency, and we've created a health cryptocurrency that tags to our data, and a lot of the countries that we're talking to are utilizing that to invest in and actually create for their funding for their own healthcare payments going forward. So there's a lot of unique opportunities looking at these different technological pieces, not just data, but that are all available now. And if we embrace these new technologies, we can actually probably fund a lot of our healthcare through some unique platforms.
Well, thank you. Thank you to everyone who's joined us on this really great conversation today, and thank you everyone to being here on a Friday afternoon. It was wonderful, and I'll leave you, I guess, with one, sort of that one final word, and I think you heard it from everyone here today. But Canada is absolutely a leader. We're a leader in innovation. We are a leader in healthcare. We are a leader literally from coast to coast to coast. So I think the opportunities beyond is really quite infinite for us, and I think what I hear from everyone is, on the urgency, it's time to step up, and let's do that now. So thank you all so much.